Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is Stephanie Bowles, and I work here in the Training, Education, and Exercises Division at the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, and we are pleased to welcome all of you to this afternoon's webinar, Radford University's Continuity Program. Before getting started, you will notice we are presenting in a slightly different format than what we have in the past. We have changed over to the Share My Desktop view, and the desktop viewing you are viewing is the presenters. In order to see both the list of participants and the chat box on your screen, you will need to click on the drop-down menu, which is located in the middle of your screen at the top. Click on the participants and chat buttons and place them anywhere on your screen. Due to the number of callers, we will be muting all participant lines during this session. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please do ask them. We just ask that you do so via the chat feature. Simply type them in and they will be answered in the same format. Or if you would rather ask your questions or make comments verbally, we ask that you hold those until the presenters take a break for questions at the end. I will ask you to raise your hand using the Raise Your Hand button located directly below the list of participants. I will then recognize you individually and ask that individual only to unmute their line using #6. At the end, there will be an opportunity to provide feedback to include suggestions for topics, and we would very much appreciate yours. This session will be recorded, and a link will be provided to all registered participants to view the recorded session. Now, Robbie Coates will do the introductions. Go ahead, Robbie.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. My name is Robbie Coates. I'm the Continuity Planner with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, and we're happy to have representatives from Radford University here today to talk about their continuity program. Radford University has shown through their planning process, their annual exercise process, and actual implementation of their continuity plan for a real-world event, that they do have a comprehensive continuity program. I'm glad that we have Todd Branscombe, who's the Emergency Coordination Officer for Radford University, as well as Grady DeVilbus, who's the Deputy ECO for Radford University, to talk through. Todd's going to talk about their annual COOP exercise, how they went through that process, and kind of walk through the scenario and kind of the outcomes of the exercise in terms of after action. And then Grady's going to give a presentation of actually a couple real-world events that happened on campus where they actually had to implement their COOP plan to keep their mission essential functions up and running. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Todd Branscombe, who's going to talk about the Radford's 2015 COOP drill. Todd?
Type of exercise in order to meet the CLARI requirements as well as VDEM and our own. We've been taking an incident and basically inviting one of the colleges and several of our facilities participants and things with us. And this year we actually focused on a drill that we thought, didn't have anything to do with hazmat. It's something we actually thought would happen. We've got a lot of construction going on. And as you look at the screen, what you'll see is our incident information we handed out. We picked Monday, December the 9th, and this was the day that our final exams had started. We wanted something where our final exams were underway and graduation was getting ready to come up at the end of the week. Temperature was 29 degrees. It was going to be in the low single digits. It's 12:30 p.m., so the exams have started. The winter commencement is going to be on Saturday, and what we actually had was a cement truck had collapsed the tunnel in front of Heath Hall, and we'll have a map here in a minute coming up, but that's pretty much in the middle of the campus. It's right in front of our dining facility. Heath is where the student accounts, financial parts are, and it's right next to one of our large academic buildings that was playing. At the time, the driver was moving, but he was trapped in the cab, and there is steam rising from the tunnel area. So this was a scenario that we set up for people, and we basically asked them as time went on, what would they do to come up through this. All right, Robbie, next. All right, there's a general map of the campus, and you can see Heath Hall. The little area is sitting right there located. This is kind of where the truck went in. And as I said, Dalton Hall is over to the bottom side of it. That's our main dining facility, and a lot of the students would have been in there at that time eating as well as taking exams. All right, Robin. All right, on our current actions, as the drill started, fire and rescue were en route to the scene. Facilities management was notified. IT and university relations had been notified. The exams, as we said, are currently ongoing, and RUPD was on the scene. So this is kind of how we started out with them. Go ahead, Robin. The disruptions in current that we had the steam lines were severed, and most all of our buildings, the heating comes from steam, as well as some of our dishwashing facilities, steam is used there as well. There are power lines that run through the tunnel system, and they were disrupted as well. Our network and fiber runs through there. So we had an outage in that area as well. We had to close down the Heath Plaza area, which again is kind of central to the area. The truck was parsed in the tunnel. The driver was still in the cab, and steam was enveloped in the area. Our buildings affected were Heath, Peters Hall, Dalton, several of our dorms that are in that area too. We had two that are just on the backside of Peters Hall, and then we have an entire quad that's on the backside of Dalton. And then city power as well. The street that this comes up used to be an actual throughway. It was a city street, so there are a lot of the city's power, water lines, and various things that run under there. And one of the things we looked at was no one was entirely quite sure of everything that did run through there. What was still active, what may have been bypassed, exactly how things may or may not would work out with that. Go ahead, Robin. Our current goals was to assess the damage from the tunnel breach. Is an evacuation from the area necessary? And they did determine an evacuation was necessary. One of the things that we have to do in higher education, we always have to have an evacuation component to meet Clery. When we had one of the Clery audits and inspections down here, that's one of the things that we found, that for this drill to count as part of theirs that we have to do, there always has to be some kind of an evacuation component. So we had it in there. We had to determine if and how exams and winter commencement will proceed. Part of this, Peters Hall is used extensively for exams as well as Dalton for feeding. And with winter commencement coming, these areas are heavily used both for parking as well as en routes through. We had to determine if temporary student housing is needed or if a closure is warranted. Most of our dorms in that area had lost heat. Through the course of the day, we kind of determined that with the heat that was in the buildings, probably they could be maintained at 65 degrees for about 4 hours. Once the temperature dropped that night, we were pretty sure that we weren't going to be able to keep it as a comfortable or an area where students could stay in. So our residential life people had to work on finding out if we had enough extra housing for the 4 dorms that could possibly be affected, or what alternatives we may have to try to put heat in it. And people did come up with space heaters and things, but it takes a lot of space heaters to try to heat up a dorm, and it really doesn't meet the safety requirements from what we saw as well. We also had to figure out how to remove the truck and repair the facilities. Currently, facilities knew kind of what was being affected, but there was no way to tell for sure. One of the things we looked at was, could we route the steam, the brake, through valves and bypasses? And it took a while to actually figure out exactly where the valves were and how that bypass would work, but the truck first had to come out. It was a fully loaded truck, so it would have come in weighing in right around 50,000 pounds. So that was a challenge first to get that out. And then when and how we could return to normal operations. Okay, Rob. Some of the participants that we had in this that we're going through, and I probably should have had this up a little bit further, but we had the College of Education plan. They had a role in this one. They had helped us in the preparing and planning. Most of their exams are held in the Peters area. Criminal Justice Department, one of the things that we've been doing for the last 3 years, one of our professors, Dr. Owens, teaches an emergency management class through the Department of Criminal Justice. Each year, these students participate with us, and they run a mirror of an EOC the same as we are. They actually put the students in the roles of the university personnel, and they play in this drill the same as we do as part of a grade for their particular class. And one of the things that's always interesting, when you go down and look, we look to see what they came up with, and they usually come up with some extremely unique ideas. One of the things that helps is they're not quite familiar with all the politics and all the people that you have to call, so it seems like things get done a lot quicker on their side than sometimes they do on ours. But for the last 3 years, this has been something we've been doing, and there was around 40-some students that were participating in this as well. And there was also the communication students, and in that they play the role of the public information officers. They play news anchors. They actually incorporated some news videography for us, where they actually made some samples of what would be going over the local news stations about the accident and the different things we were taking. And then they play as reporters, because during the course our public information officers will go out, they'll make statements just as we would normally do if it was a real incident, trying to get the information put together, and then they're recorded, and then this is played back. So these students are actually doing this as part of their grades as well. We have the facilities management, information technology, our registrar's office. And our registrar's office turned out to be critical on this one, because they're the ones that actually schedule the rooms for where the exams are. And in a minute we can talk a little bit more about that, because we did run into some interesting things with that. The city of Radford participated, the university police, of course our office. VDEM was in as well. We actually invited Robbie Coates down so that he could kind of observe and let us know if we were kind of on track or off track. And I think this is the second year we've invited Robbie, and had also invited Eileen Tarr as well. Our business administration folks also participated in this, and that was all from our financial group as well as from our parking and our residential life. Okay, Robbie. Okay, we're getting ready to change over, but some of the goals that came out of this, some of the things that we learned, and that slide didn't get put in, but one of the things that we got out of this particular drill was in scheduling the classes. Everybody knew that a professor was supposed to be doing a class, but a lot of times what we found is that the professor may have done something else. He actually wasn't using the room. He had done a hand-in assignment, or he'd done something online. So we knew the room was supposed to be scheduled, but a lot of times they were empty. So that kind of presented the challenge, trying to find a place to keep these exams going, because once they'd started, the determination was made that we needed to go ahead and try to finish them, that there was enough other buildings on campus that wouldn't be affected. One of the other things that came out of this was exactly what type of room was needed. And some of the faculty that played with us, they actually had stated, we need a room. And as we got down to it, it was like, well, are you using multimedia? Are you doing paper exams? Do you need computers and IT support, or you just need a space? And when we actually got to looking at the type of room, that's where things kind of got interesting, because a lot of people now are doing the online, or they're doing the computer type exams. So a lot of our computer labs were tied up, so we were looking at actually having to set up places with desktop or with laptop computers that students could come into. Some of the professors didn't actually need anything but just a space. They were doing oral presentations or something, but in trying to figure out exactly what rooms were in use and exactly what type of room the person needed, this was one of our bigger challenges in going through. From the facility side, just trying to make the bypass. We had a lot of valves and things, but some of the valves hadn't been turned in a while, and they weren't sure that they would hold, or if they would leak for the bypass. In getting the truck out, it was determined that there was going to have to actually be an offload take place to try to offload the concrete out of it before it actually froze up, and then a crane unit had to come in. And with the tunnel already collapsed, there was some concern about trying to get something that large in to actually pull the concrete truck out. But that was done, and then of course IT and facilities all have to go in and have to make an assessment of how much is damaged. And I think it was determined that there were around 6 buildings that were offline. They were able to bypass around and get most of the others online. Dalton was able to go back and start feeding. They did have a different area that they could run the steam line through, so they could shut down the one side and run back through. So once the initial truck got pulled out and the barricades and things got up, they could go to feed. Now, we do have a backup feeding facility in Muse Hall, so it was able to take over into the short run, and some schedules had to be worked out there to keep it open and to keep some options going a little bit for that. From the student side, they actually had come up with a few different things. The students were actually wanting to close the university down for 2 to 3 days until all this stuff got done, and they were looking at doing completely online exams. And that was kind of typical, but what they didn't realize was a lot of our faculty don't put anything online. They're not putting anything but a syllabus. They don't have a way of doing online exams. So that's something we were looking at too, is how to get more of our information able to be put online, or how to get places where we could get this thing maybe up and going. And for the students, it was natural. It's something they do all the time. They just assumed that this is what would happen. We talked about using our RU Alert service to actually get the information out, as well as our web and social media pages. And for the students, they primarily were using social media to get the word out to fellow students. This is a way that they communicate. It's a way that they like to get information. They were using sites that, frankly, I'd never heard of. I'm kind of new to the game. Twitter and Facebook are still something I can use them, but I really don't like to if I don't have to. And they were on things that I hadn't even, frankly, were aware that even existed. So in looking at some of the information that they came up with, it was interesting. Our evacuation was short-term that we talked about. We basically had to move some students around, but Residential Life was able to house the majority of them on empty spaces on campus. And then several of them, Res Life had talked to probably would be able to stay with friends that had apartments and things off campus. And there was also talk about renting out various apartments, and if we had to, going up to the local hotel and basically renting some rooms up there, and maybe even renting out the conference center if we had to use that as a place to maybe do some online exams. So through the course of it, it ended up being a pretty good drill. We do have a lot of construction going on campus, so concrete trucks are pretty much a daily fact here. We see them quite often. They're coming back and forth across, and the section of tunnel we picked is an older section. So it was a real-world event we thought that actually could possibly happen, and we did pick exam time. That was the time that everybody always says, don't let anything go wrong. So we picked it right there just to see what would happen, and trying to schedule rooms was the biggest one, finding out which rooms actually were being used, and then the type of room that would be needed to do a particular exam turned out to be two of our biggest challenges. And with that, my time is up, so I'm going to turn it over to Grady, and he's going to talk about some real-world events that we had shortly after the drill.
Thanks, Todd. I'm going to add one comment to Todd's presentation. We actually had the assistant provost participating in the exercise, and that was helpful. And we're scheduled, the assistant provost is going to facilitate a meeting with some deans and the provost. Unfortunately, our provost just leaving and has gone to another school to be president. So we're working on that end, but we are going to follow up as an after-action component to go work back through the academia part, because the academics did not want to reschedule the exams. It was just going to be too much of an issue for that, as well as a lot of people were going to be gone on vacation. It was winter break, so it was a lot of good, honest dialogue that came out that we're still going to pick back up and work through. So if you think of some other questions, Todd's right here in the room with me, and we can address those after this presentation. Again, I would like to welcome you as well to RU, and giving us your time today to talk about this incident, or a couple of incidents that we had. So, Robbie, if you're ready. We had a glitch in getting connected here, so Robbie's got to be the clicker today. Okay, you can see this is where that happened in February, and we were actually experiencing a lot of cold weather, as a lot of you were also, and you can see the time there. And we got a notification from Radford City about a water main break, and it's affected our whole eastern section of the city, and that directly impacted us. And immediately our facilities people started getting some calls that we're without water. We had no idea that the break had occurred. And it was kind of interesting because at our, I don't know if you're familiar with, I'm going to show you a map here in a minute, but the first building, which is at the highest level on our campus, was obviously the first one that was affected by water, and we knew something was wrong. So then the city, they were doing their thing to try to figure out where it was and what was going on, and didn't know if it was going to be a protracted event for us. So the map's coming up next, Robbie. hard for you to see, but kind of up at about 10:30 or 11 o'clock, you'll see that's where the break was. And then if you go directly across, if you can read where Radford University is there, put a dot there in the middle of the campus. So the break was actually about 1.2 miles away from the university. The circumstances were, I mean, there was water that was, and I live here in the city and actually still on the fire department, so we knew there was an issue somewhere along in that area. We kept having some water coming up, but the unique thing about this, it affected the supply line that fills a 1 million-gallon tank that's not far from the university itself. So that was an issue that they're still trying to correct. It was tied into the feed line as well that went to this large tank there, because we should have had some reserve water for a while. So that's still something that's being evaluated. Next slide, Robbie. So our mission essential functions there, you can see, is to coordinate and support the academic continuity, and then protect the life and safety of students, employees, staff, visitors while on campus. Next slide. So this is actually out of our coop, and the activation that we did, this was an emergency level 2. It was kind of borderline maybe with a level 1, but if it went past 24 hours, it was we're gonna kick into that. So we went ahead with a potential event, and you can see there system or equipment failure, which was a water main, and then the impact on our ability to perform our MEFs. In our matrix and flow chart, that was the convening of the senior administration, or our meeting. We actually didn't meet in our EOC here at our office. We were at where all of our senior administrative offices are, and there's a conference room there that we pulled everybody into that we've used before. And then some of the decisions, the limited COOP implementation, for that we weren't going to apply all the phases of it, but it was going to be portions of it. And then the event, we were estimating it to disrupt the operation of our MEFs for more than established recommended time objectives. So, when you're in one of these where, and I've talked to many of you that are on the line, over the years, that water just cripples a higher ed facility and a municipality very quickly, and can for a long time. So, you're kind of just the what ifs as you're working through it. And then our notification matrix we were using, again, it was a level 2 event for us, so that determined who and when got notified, and our executive leadership, and then the communication coordination throughout, our internal departments, and then the external local government, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. Next slide, Robbie. So, again, the immediate issues, all buildings on campus were just affected, creating the following problems and challenges and priorities. So our fire sprinkler systems, you can see there, our toilets, which any of you have been through this, these aren't your typical, that we have in our homes with the tanks on top. And we had, at that time, roughly there about 10,000 folks with students and employees and staff on campus. Dining services, there was no pre-warning for this, so you saw at the time it went down was 11:40. Well, everybody's getting ramped up to serve, lunch, actually in the middle of that. So they could not operate per the Department of Health requirements, and, requiring hand washing, and for employees and workers, dishwashers couldn't work, and they must be operational. So, that throws another kink into things for that. No drinking water, no hand washing. Student health services, they actually had some students that were in there to see them with the stomach virus. It wasn't related to the event, but so we don't have toilets there to facilitate that. And then during the winter, obviously we need the steam, and so the makeup water for the steam generation, the boiler, was of a concern too. Next slide, Robbie. So first thing, we want to make everybody aware of that. So you can see we just did our RU alert system and sent that out, and then our RU announce, which is the blast email, and just to make everybody aware that we knew what's going on, and the water outage, let them know. And we decided we were going to have to close the university. So and we you got to be kind of specific with those messages, as you all know. You don't have want to put too much into them, but just what you want the people to know right off the get-go. And so we thought that getting the university closed and getting folks off the campus, as many that we could that were non-essential, we could help to conserve what water we had, and of course we have quite a few students that live off campus as well, so they were without water, but we knew we would have to be feeding them as well, and providing water for them. And then we advised the people to, just to do situational awareness and try to monitor what was going on throughout this event. Next slide. So our critical functions and services are fire sprinklers, obviously. There was no pressure, no water volume. So the state fire marshal, he was notified, and it's kind of, if you're greater than 2 hours without water on there, he wanted a fire watch implemented. So the corrective action and contingency we had there was, you can see, facility management, division of student affairs were the leads, and environmental health and safety staff helped to coordinate with the director of housing operations to do the just-in-time fire watch training to our resident directors and our resident advisors there. That's something that we really don't have in place. We're going to take a hard look at that and do that, with our orientation for our new RAs and RDs coming up this fall. Next slide. Of course, the bathrooms and toilets weren't available for use, but people are still going to use them and try to flush them. So that's an issue later on as well. The corrective action and contingency, the facility management admin was the lead, and they coordinated with our contract vendor. I mean, we have porta-johns that are here for athletic events and other events, so able to talk to that vendor and had 100 units they could put their hands on right away. And so then there's a consideration, where you going to stage them at, and you got ice and snow across the campus as well, so we were trying to identify where we could put those. We didn't bring them onto campus, but those were considerations as well. I mean, it's one thing to find them, but where you going to put them, and then again, how long going to be there? You got to get the honey wagons in there to be able to clean them out as well. Next slide. Critical functions continuing with dining services. Again, looking at the corrective action at the time and the contingency, the dining and our university services folks, they were the lead. Dalton Hall was one of our two main feeding centers, and Dalton was kept online until 10 p.m. To take care of the students with the meals plans, and if we, just had some other students that we needed to take care of, and plus employees as well, staff. Public affairs provided, we're working with them, announcement. Our public affairs person is the vice president, so he's in our executive and senior administration working with us on these announcements, what's going out. So it went out about Dalton Hall would remain open and online till 10. And then the Department of Health approved the following for us so that, we could serve people. We didn't obviously have water or hot water, so we put it out in a kind of a salad bar type style, if you would, and provided food for the folks, and they, as you can read there, you know, it was they had to wear gloves and hand sanitizers, and were there for the students to have at the beginning of serving, and so that worked well. That kept folks fed, and you know, if you can keep them from getting hungry, then that works out better for you. Okay, next slide. The drinking water and hand washing, dining services, the corrective action and contingency dining services and emergency preparedness, we were the lead on that, and they had supply of water on hand. They always keep that, but the vendors that we have our soda machines contracted with, it's kind of interesting. They had water on there, but they couldn't get back to their warehouses. We wanted some more water. Our vendors, there again, they had water on the trucks, but we needed some more, wanted some more, and the roads were bad, and they just couldn't get back to their warehouses. So that kicked us over to the next bullet. So I reached out, or we did, to Radford City, Montgomery emergency managers, and with their water, and they have it existing with Walmart, as we do too. But so we went ahead and had RU truck provided, and some staff staged up to go pick that up if we needed to. So we had that contingency in place. Next slide, Rob, please. Thank you. And the student health services, the corrective action contingency, the medical director and designee were the lead on that. We were in communication with them, and they were coordinated with Korean River Valley Medical Center, which is our hospital that's within about 3.5 miles from the university, to help us with managing for care for patients if necessary. Okay, next slide, Robbie. And then continuing with our critical functions and services, the boilers and the steam generation, the facilities management were the lead on that. And they have enough reserve water in reserve to operate for 2 days. And then contingency plans were discussed for bringing water in via the fire department or however we needed to do that. And we're addressing that in some after action as well. But we still had enough water to operate some steam across the campus as well. Okay, next slide. So you can see there it started at 11:40, and at 15:30 hours, the city advised that the repair was holding, and the million-gallon storage tank that served East Radford in our area, approximately 8 hours to get that filled if all things went well. We delayed a little bit to get the message out, because there was a chance of the repair not holding and that. So we were in constant communication with the city, and but at 1600 hours, you can see we got our executive senior management together, and just to see what the incident status was, and if things went well, when and where could we resume normal operations. So we had a lot of facilities staff, electricians, maintenance, carpenters, everybody was out, and making sure that water was up and flowing and going. And so you can see there, we got the report that they were all operational and we were in good shape. So we made the announcement and provided that information that we'd be open the next day at 0800 hours, and also reminded everybody to do a water conservation for 24 hours there as well. Next slide. It was about 10 days later or so, we had our after-action meeting, and it was all the folks that were involved with it, our executive, senior administration, and other folks. We had an agenda that we developed and sent out to everybody, and one of the things was to rank as a priority what we had, and this is kind of how it ranked out. Number one was the fire safety, 2, food service, toilet flushing was next, and then drinking water and hand washing. It was kind of interesting, and when things started off, it was like, okay, we need to get a lot of drinking water, get things in here. But we had drinking water, and we were in good shape there. It was just these other things that were really jamming us up. So we had to pay attention to and manage those in a priority way. Next slide, please. So, we talked about our strengths. So we were together, we convened, we had established our priorities, set our objectives, closed the university to enhance water conservation and get folks off here that we didn't have to take care of more folks. Distributed water, those locations were identified in that announcement that was sent out about Dalton Hall closing, and where they could get water, so we had to move the water around to different locations across the campus to make it, more accessible to everybody. We're able to continue feeding folks, which is important, obviously. And the porta toilets and additional water supply, we had those ready to go. In our areas for improvement, we talked about, our notification from the city of Radford. That was, we've improved that. We continue to work that. Not that we have an issue. We work with the utilities in the city, but they identified that, and now I think we're on a priority call for them when they have something come up. The fire watch is definitely challenging to get folks trained in that just-in-time training arena. So we to try to accomplish that. Again, we consider different type of toilet for student health services, and that's being looked into, what it's going to take to replumb and put maybe those appliances in there. And then I think this is a challenge for everybody. If it's a protracted event or the weather prohibits getting students off campus, getting people home, a protracted event, the challenges for long-term feeding and sheltering, for that. So next slide, Robbie. Improvements, water gauges were put in, and actually Steve Harrison is here with our facilities management. I asked Steve to sit in on us, and he was able just to join us. So after we finish this, we can take some questions as well. But the water pressure gauges were installed at 3 of our buildings there, and improvements after this event, and so when we see, and those are monitored, and when we see that a drop in that, we'll know something's going on. And actually, after the second event, I'm going to talk about in a minute. I think it was the second event. We have our Radford City Utilities administrative people that are connected to those notifications as well. So it helps them sense something that's going wrong in the city. Plans, we're talking about replacing toilets in student health, and identifying buildings. We're always talking about power generators, and is there a building or a building where we could keep powered up and maybe have water connections to keep it online, where we could bring students in there and maybe feed them, a place where they could warm up if it's cold, charge their cell phones. Our wellness center is one of our buildings we've identified that has showers we can maybe bring them to and keep that powered up. But that's expensive, and it's a lot of planning. So those are just, again, as it says, they're there in the plans to talk about. Next slide, please. Again, I've got it. That ain't all, folks. So on Sunday, March the 15th, we had another event. We had a power outage, and it was the majority of the campus was affected. The immediate issues for us there, that was when our students were returning from spring break. You can see the time roughly that it was happening. So that was about 7:25, and we experiencing power outages, kind of like a rolling brownout. that was a Sunday, so we really weren't staffed up, to have a lot of folks. So we had to bring staff in to start looking and see what was going on. We were in communication with city's electric department from the get-go on that, but it took them a while to assess and see what was going on. You can see we had occupants entrapped on elevators in 2 separate buildings, and then dining services was offline as well. Next slide. We were communicating with one another again with our senior administration. Our facility ops director was calling in staff and coordinating with the city, and it was kind of a wait and see game because you could look out and see, some of the campus was well lighted and some of it was dark. So again, that was kind of that rolling brownout, and that really had a huge effect on power. I mean, and Steve maybe can address that. I'm not an electrician, but that could be damaging and really be challenging for our electrical service as well. Here at Office of Emergency Preparedness and other university and administrative departments, we were passing around information and sharing that. We have some research that's going on, so we have in some of our labs there are sensitive cold and light sensitive issues, so they have to be addressed as well, especially if they're not under backup generator power. So you're communicating with academia as well about that. And then the communication center, as always, is overwhelmed with getting calls in. So at 21 hours there, about 8 o'clock, the entrapped occupants were out of the elevators, and then at 2100 hours, 9, we had power restored to the campus. So that was quick. The city found a fuse. They tried to restore that, but there was, I guess, too much demand that was being on there. They had to shut some other things off, and it didn't work the first time, but they did get it restored, and so we were not too long without power. Okay, next slide. Then you can see on Wednesday we had another water event, and this was huge. It was another main. It was a 12-inch main, and it actually just exploded. And it looked like somebody had an explosion in the street. It blew pavement everywhere, but you can imagine with that size water and pressure, it would do damage. Again, sounds like a repeat. Eastern section of the city and RU campus immediately affected with reduced pressure. Although we kept seeing in this time with our gauges on there, it didn't go completely down. We weren't totally without water, but we didn't have sufficient amount. And you can see it was going to take the city, that time frame to try to repair it if it went well, and to dig up the street and get a 10-foot section of water main back in there and back in service. That's a pretty good time frame. Fortunately, we had a reduced amount of student population here. It was after spring semester and commencement. We had 4 residence halls. We have full-time occupants there that are resident directors and actually live in apartments there. So we had to provide a fire watch for them because they were occupied buildings. So facilities maintenance staff did that around were set up to do that. Then spring semester, again, we didn't have many people here. We had enough water pressure to support some bathrooms, but not fire suppression systems. So there again is why we had the fire watch was set up. Next slide. I think that's the end of it. Yep. Well, let me make a comment, and Steve might be able to chime in too. It's one thing to manage the emergency, but as I've learned with these folks, to bring in your campus back up online, there are a lot of issues. Those of you that may have experienced that can certainly identify with that, but it's keeping staff here, and it's a lot of coordination with facilities management folks. And it's one thing. If your resident dorms are populated, then you're going to get the feedback, because they're going to say typically the toilets with the water shortage, and Steve's shaking his head here, but they're going to start flooding, with that. And then that can lead to another issue where if it's in an area where there's not somebody and they're flooding, like the second water main break we had, you got to have people that are hitting every floor, and seeing if there are flooding, because that's going to create some other issues. So getting the university back up and going is huge. And that power outage, one thing, when that occurred, our dining services had just received about $100,000 shipment of food, I think, that was stored in the freezers. So that was of a concern. Steve, if you want to make a comment to that, you're certainly welcome to. I don't know if any questions have come up yet.
I guess, thanks, Grady. I guess one of the biggest things, what was weird for us, I'm with facilities, was both of those instances, the first water one and the power blip, was a matter of we didn't know what was wrong. Both were outlying items that kind of outlined some data that we probably need to have our hands on. And plus, we're so used to working in our own little silo as a university, and it forced us to try and work better with the city. And so it's not that we don't work well with the city, but we're so used to our own data, having our own control over everything. And, the water thing, we just came to realize we didn't have enough ways to tell what was the problem. We were getting a lot of calls. The calls came in actually starting at our highest point on campus, so topography played a role, and it just kind of kept working its way down. We went from thinking we had a issue in one building to why do we have the same call coming in for another building, but we had nothing to look at to tell people whether we were really experiencing a problem or not. And at the same time, the city's trying to fight the same thing, so you kind of go through when you're in an emergency setting, even a half hour feels like a lifetime when you can't answer the questions. Similarly, with the power thing, what ended up happening was the city lost our substations across the street, and they actually dropped one phase of the three-phase power. And so some things worked, some things didn't work at all, and some things were functioning on 2 out of 3 phases. So a lot of motors and a lot of stuff like that were running on 2 out of 3 phases. So a lot of our first calls came in from our dining facility because of the number of equipment in there. And then I was actually the first one on campus that day, and I made the phone call and said, I think whatever happened must be a done deal. We're fully restored. I just went by the fitness center. They're in there playing basketball like it's no big deal. The lights are on. Went by the other building, it looked good, and you come to realize that depending on where you were, they were operating in a state of total normalcy, and then other places were totally dark. We also came to realize how many different people have different things going on, and then all of a sudden it becomes an emergency you weren't even ready for. So all the scientists come out of the woodwork saying, well, I've got $20,000 worth of research in that freezer, and I need power to that freezer. And even though part of you's like, we got bigger fish to fry right now, you're still trying to meet even what feels like at the time small demands of the campus, and those just kind of things just kept coming up. So we thought because it was a city issue, at first I don't think our staffing levels were adequate because we didn't think what we were looking at would require quite as much manpower, but it turned into be quite the endeavor. But luckily, the city was able to pinpoint within a couple hours what they thought. Like Grady had mentioned, they tried a couple things and they finally got it. But and then that does lead to some of the post-outage issues, bringing stuff back online. Played havoc on a lot of motors. All of our controls were flipped upside down. Nothing came back up the way you'd like it to. So, there's a lot of people here late trying to get the programming back right on everything. We did a visual check on everything, dining related. Put our heads in every freezer, make sure everything was coming back up. And actually, it was a really good thing we did. I think a lot of people were ready to leave. on a Sunday evening, but on our visual walkthrough, checking every building, we found more than a dozen issues that they would have just sat there all night if we hadn't looked at them. So, I think those two were interesting because we just didn't. We were into them for an hour before we knew what we were really dealing with.
Thanks, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Stephanie, Robbie, any questions from anybody?
I don't see any questions as of yet, guys, but I did post up the participant feedback survey. If you guys would all, who are still on the line, go ahead and fill that out and let us know if this was helpful for you guys. I know, Robbie, do you have anything else?
No, I just want to say thank you for Todd and Grady for taking the time out of your schedule and Steve there to give us that information and give us an overview of your program. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you all for having us. We appreciate everybody that listened in.
If y'all do have any questions, you can email them to me, and I'll make sure they get to Todd and Grady.
Sure, absolutely.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone have a great day.
Do the same. Thank you.